All right, so as the American President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin meet in Alaska, the fate of the Ukraine war hangs in balance. The death toll is in the hundreds of thousands. Entire cities have been wiped off the map. And millions of the Ukrainian people have been driven out from their homes. And now the front line is shifting again, with Russia mounting a pretty dangerous new push in the Donetsk region. In this report, we break down the war in cold, hard numbers. Take a look.
Three years, hundreds of thousands of troops killed on both sides, and 20% of Ukrainian land captured by Russia. This war has been the deadliest in Europe since World War II, and specifically for Russia. 15 times deadlier than the Soviet-Afghan war, 10 times bloodier than Chechnya. The fighting has been fierce. 24,259 battles reported in just 1 week. 24,839 air and drone strikes. 16,716 shelling attacks, and dozens of civilian attacks. In July alone, 6,200 attack drones launched by Russia, part of what is being described as a grind-down strategy that is aimed at overwhelming Ukraine's relatively weaker air defenses. What these drone swarms do is clear the way for deadlier cruise missiles to be launched. Ukraine's deep strike drones continue to hit high-value targets inside Russia, but the front line keeps shifting. Pokrovsk, a key highway and rail hub in Donetsk, is now partially encircled by Russian troops. Ukraine has rushed reinforcements to hold the line, including the Azov Brigade. But it isn't enough to hold off the Russian advance. In August, Russian forces advanced 10 kilometers beyond the front lines in Donetsk, and more settlements in eastern Ukraine continue to fall to Russian hands each day. Russia now controls 114,500 square kilometers, that's about 20% of Ukraine. It holds almost all of Luhansk, 3/4 of Donetsk, and most of Zaporizhia and Kherson. Now it is pushing to seize the rest. On Russia's target, the so-called Fortress Belt, a 50-kilometer defensive chain of cities, including Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka, and the latest major Ukrainian stronghold in the east. Earlier in May, Russia seized 215 square miles of Ukrainian territory, its biggest land grab of the year. Over 3 years of war, and the toll is staggering. Russia's attacks have doubled since US President Donald Trump took office 6 months ago, and so has Russia's ballistic missile production, up 66% in a year. The war has also displaced 10 million Ukrainians. That's nearly a quarter of the entire country's population. Their future and the fate of the war is in the hands of the two leaders meeting in Alaska today. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, now joining us in the broadcast, we've got Mr. Lester Munson, who's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and the co-head of the international practice at the BGR Group, a leading government relations firm in Washington, D.C. Mr. Munson, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. So this is a very, very crucial summit meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It is to happen in a few hours from now in Alaska. But before heading into this meeting, in your assessment, who do you think has a stronger hand in these negotiations?
Well, I guess it depends on who we're comparing the hands of. We should note that it's President Putin who's meeting with President Trump. So I would say just on the face of it, it looks like Russia has the upper hand over Ukraine at the moment. However, President Trump has been taking action that very much helps Ukraine. He's been willing to impose third country sanctions on those countries that are buying Russian energy sources. That is a significant change in U.S. policy. and is a much tougher approach to Moscow than even the Biden administration had. And also, President Trump has been saying, kind of asserting an approach here that really puts the onus on Putin, on Vladimir Putin, to do something positive with respect to a ceasefire. So while this tilts a little bit in favor of Russia because it's Putin who's meeting with Trump, it's a real challenge for Putin at the same time to do something that Trump sees as constructive.
Right. Now, some commentators are saying that, after having at least 6 phone calls with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump is now headed for this in-person summit meeting in Alaska. Now, real politics is dictated by who has power on the ground. With the Ukrainians not being able to push back the Russian war machine with the weapons that were supplied by the Americans, do you think Donald Trump's threat of imposing more tariffs and more sanctions on Russia's trade allies can actually convince Vladimir Putin to back off in this war in Ukraine, which Vladimir Putin is convinced he's winning on the ground?
I think it's still, yes, there have been some little pushes by Russia lately that indicates they're still in the game in terms of the violence that's happening on the ground. In other words, that Russia's not willing to concede that it's losing. However, for President Putin to go back to Moscow and support a ceasefire, he needs to look like he's won something. So the challenge for President Trump here is, can he construct a way forward here that gives Vladimir Putin the cover to show to his hardliners in Moscow that he's doing the right thing for Russian interests? And that is a difficult task, to be sure. This is the most intractable conflict in the world today, the one that is the most violent and leading to the most death. There's a very high degree of difficulty here. And the challenge is for President Trump is to find a way for Putin to agree to a ceasefire that doesn't expose him to the hardliners back in Russia who may be trying to pressure him to take a tougher line.
That of course is going to be a huge challenge. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Lester Munson, for joining us with that perspective there.
Pleasure.